During the 1980s, the city of Dublin in Ireland was plagued by illegal substances, supplied by one of the biggest crime families in the country, the Dunne family. However, after its leader was arrested, the organization collapsed, just in time for a little-known small-time criminal named Christopher Kinahan to sidle in and take its place. Over the next several decades, the Kinahan Organized Crime Group flourished, becoming one of the most powerful in Ireland and one of the biggest in the world. Irish courts concluded that the group is responsible for countless deaths, the supply of the vast majority of drugs in Ireland and the UK, and is likely worth up to €1 billion. Join us for this documentary as we examine the case of the Kinahan Organized Crime Group, Ireland's most terrifying crime family. The beginning. Kinahan Sr. was born on March 23, 1957 in Dublin, Ireland. Though there are reports of Kinahan using various passports, each denoting different birthplaces, including a British passport stating that he was born in Perivale, a suburb of Greater London. According to the Irish Independent, Kinahan is the only son of a dairy firm manager, though journalist Nicola Tallant has stated that his father worked at a taxi rank by the Gresham Hotel. Most sources agree that Kinahan's mother operated a bed and breakfast out of the couple's Victorian terraced home on Charleville Road in the neighborhood of Phibsborough, Dublin, and Tallant added that Kinahan is a cuckoo in the nest of organized crime. He doesn't really fit, in part because of his upbringing. As opposed to many career criminals who are often subjected to violence, neglect, and poverty, Kinahan and his family enjoyed a comfortable, stable, and middle-class lifestyle. As the only boy in the household, journalists described how he was doted on and adored in his youth. Like many of those who'd come before him, Kinahan's first illegal endeavors were small-scale, specializing specifically in check fraud and referred to as a kite man. He is said to have used his well-spoken manner to pass as an upper-class Irishman and sometimes even an Englishman. Law enforcement in Ireland recalled that Kinahan was a petty criminal and low down on the list of people that they were interested in pursuing. Michael O'Sullivan, the former assistant commissioner with the Irish police, stated, "He would put on a posh accent and go and bounce checks and disappear again. As criminals go, he was inconsequential." O'Sullivan also observed, however, that Kinahan was not a run-of-the-mill criminal. Though his activities were small and limited at the time, he was strategic in the way he would think, and he was always looking to earn that extra money. O'Sullivan added that Kinahan was, in part, driven by a desire for wealth and an easy life, stating, "He was an opportunist, and he began to see that there was an easier life than bouncing checks, and there was far more money in it." Beginning in the 1970s, heroin use in Dublin was rampant, and the problem only grew worse during the 1980s. In 1983, the Bradshaw report established that in north-central Dublin, 10% of 15 to 24-year-olds had used the substance in the previous year. Much of the illegal drug trade was centered in Dublin at this time, with researchers noting that there were far fewer cases of heroin abuse in cities like Galway and Cork. It was common knowledge that a man named Larry Dunne was responsible for bringing heroin into the city, with the Dunne family at the time being known as the crime family in Dublin City. Larry Dunne had grown up in impoverished conditions in Dublin as one of 14 children. His father served time in prison for manslaughter, and many of the children spent time in a reformatory school following their involvement in petty crime. In the 1970s, Dunne began bringing heroin into Dublin, having networked with various criminals in Britain to help him accomplish this. By 1982, despite being unemployed, he had acquired so much wealth that he was able to purchase a luxury home worth €1.3 million in today's money. Though the Irish government created a special governmental task force on drug abuse in 1983 and noted several suggestions that could improve the lives of those struggling with substance abuse, such reports went unpublished because the government's stance at the time was that drug users were simply victims of their own choices and there was no interest in exploring the circumstances surrounding why one might resort to drug use, such as economic or social factors. Adding to this strict outlook, the following year, the government enacted the Misuse of Drugs Act 1984, which sought to dole out even tougher punishments on drug users than the previously instated Misuse of Drugs Act 1977. Due to a lack of aid from the government, local citizens began to organize their own advocacy groups in the hopes of ridding the city of such substances. Priests and provisional IRA members, amongst others, championed the idea of improving their communities and participated in residents' associations within the city where such matters were discussed. Others began naming and shaming the local drug dealers, who were subsequently issued ultimatums to stop selling or leave the area. Eventually, patrols were set up by residents and forced evictions and drug searches of vehicles, all unofficial as they were never carried out by law enforcement. In 1983, Larry Dunne was brought before the courts after law enforcement collected enough evidence to press charges of drug trafficking against him, and he was ultimately found guilty. Michael O'Sullivan recalled that before Dunne was sentenced, he stated, "Look, if you think I'm bad, you want to see what's coming behind me." O'Sullivan observed that his words had been very prophetic. O'Sullivan worked with the Garda drug squad in the 1980s and recalled going undercover as a potential buyer, hanging around blocks of flats and waiting for dealers to arrive with their supply. He remembered noticing that although Dunne had been convicted, there was still somebody keeping a steady flow of heroin entering the city. The police hadn't put a stop to the drugs circulating the city just because one criminal enterprise had ended. Instead, someone else had simply risen up to take Dunne's place. Following some investigation by the authorities, the name Christopher Kinahan came to their attention. Though Kinahan was found to be at the top of the hierarchy, law enforcement recalled their surprise at the discovery, as when the name Kinahan had circulated before, it had never been in connection with drugs or any kind of serious crime. His track record included fraud, theft, burglary, and handling stolen goods. When looking further into him, investigators discovered that he was living in a luxury flat in an affluent neighborhood in Dublin and was known to drive a red sports car. Both of these seemed unusual, as the city's economy had been devastated by numerous factors: political violence, mass emigration, heavy unemployment, and political stagnation. In 1986, undercover police dressed as handymen investigated the apartment complex where Kinahan was living, searching for his specific flat, which they eventually identified. Several officers, including Michael O'Sullivan, went to the door of the home, which was opened by an Algerian man, identified themselves, and entered. Kinahan was at the kitchen table eating lunch, with O'Sullivan recalling that he visibly paled when he looked up and saw the officers, as on another table were stacks upon stacks of heroin, which would later be valued at £117,000. Both Kinahan and the Algerian man, another drug trafficker who Nicola Tallant described as a man who was well known on the international stage, were arrested at the flat. Given the amount of drugs in Kinahan's home, many observed that he was not your everyday, average dealer, but somebody with ambition who sought to become a much bigger player in the world of international drug trafficking. His position in the wider scheme was described to the courts as the Director of Operations. Kinahan pleaded guilty, telling the court that he was a heroin addict who sought to turn his life around, despite the fact that the amount of heroin in his possession went far beyond that of personal use. He was sentenced to 6 years behind bars, and he served his time at Mountjoy Prison in Dublin. Though many hoped that this would be the end of Kinahan's career, it was far from it. Rather than using the time away from the rest of the world to reform, the criminal kingpin began making connections with people who could help him expand his empire. Following his release in 1992, Kinahan barely made it a year before the police were knocking on his door again, following charges of possession of stolen checks. However, he was subsequently bailed and fled to the UK. This was also in part due to changing tides within Dublin following the 1996 murder of investigative journalist Veronica Guerin, who was killed in her car while stopped at a red light on the Naas dual carriageway. The hit had allegedly been orchestrated by John Gilligan, a convicted criminal and crime boss who had previously attacked and threatened Veronica on several occasions. The crime caused massive outrage amongst the public, and politicians and journalists alike labeled it an attack on democracy. A week after the murder, the Proceeds of Crime Act 1996 was put into place, as well as the Criminal Assets Bureau Act 1996, which would allow the government to seize money and assets obtained through crimes. This, in turn, led to the formation of the Criminal Assets Bureau. Kinahan left the UK shortly after his arrival and departed for Amsterdam in the Netherlands, which Irish journalist Paul Williams referred to as the Wall Street of the international drug market. Though he was no longer in Dublin, Kinahan didn't let this slow down his operations, and he instead began working from Amsterdam's largest red light district, the Wallen, where he took advantage of the 1990s ecstasy boom. At this time, Kinahan was accompanied by John Cunningham, an Irish fugitive whom he'd met during his first stint in prison. Cunningham had served time behind bars for kidnapping after he participated in the abduction of Irish heiress Jennifer Guinness, who was rescued by law enforcement 8 days later, and he had ties to Irish crime boss Martin Cahill. He had escaped from prison and been smuggled to Amsterdam, where Kinahan introduced him to the drug trade, and the two became partners in crime. Literally. In the latter half of the 1990s, Kinahan drew attention to himself after cashing £16,000 worth of stolen travelers' checks, the spoils of a previous armed robbery. In 1997, he returned to Dublin for his father's funeral and was subsequently arrested in connection with the stolen checks. Michael O'Sullivan recalled being given the task of interviewing the notorious criminal and how Kinahan had remained silent throughout their interaction. He eventually spoke only to say, "You think you're so smart? I followed you." O'Sullivan told him that he already knew that. He'd spotted Kinahan following him in 1992 after his release from prison in Dublin. The officer gave Kinahan a description of the car and the license plate number, after which the criminal kingpin went silent again. O'Sullivan stated that this was the last conversation he ever had with Kinahan. This time around, Kinahan was denied bail. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to 4 years, which he spent at Ireland's main maximum security prison, Portloy's Prison. A prison officer who worked there during Kinahan's incarceration described him as being charismatic, calm, and tidy, noting that he never caused trouble. Notably, while behind bars, Kinahan obtained degrees in both Russian and Spanish. He famously declined to take early release so that he could finish his studies. During the 1990s, Kinahan's two sons, Daniel, born in 1977, and Christopher Jr., born in 1980, took control of operations in Dublin, overseeing the distribution of their father's new supply sent all the way from Amsterdam. Ecstasy was enjoying a huge boom in popularity at this time, having become the drug of choice for ravers and clubgoers. The pair continued to hold the reins on the Irish side of the business after Kinahan's conviction for the stolen travelers' checks, though intelligence reports by Irish law enforcement observed that it was likely they were still working under their father's instruction, with Daniel visiting the prison 3 to 4 times per week. In late 1998, after a shipment of pita bread was found to have contained marijuana and firearms, an investigation led law enforcement to Kinahan's partner in crime, John Cunningham. They then discovered that Kinahan was controlling the Amsterdam side of the business via phone calls, having had a mobile phone smuggled into the prison for him. Despite this, Kinahan was released from prison in 2001, when he fled Ireland once more, this time heading for Spain. The Hutch-Kinahan Feud. During the early 2000s, Costa del Sol was known by law enforcement as Costa del Crime. In part, thanks to a lack of an extradition treaty, British and Irish crime bosses and drug lords often escaped to this part of Spain in order to live more freely, away from the prying eyes of investigators. Here, they could enjoy the sun and the sea, but still carry out their operations from afar, and even extend them via networking. The Spanish shore also had the added bonus of being just 12 miles from Morocco, one of the biggest suppliers of marijuana, and Kinahan was introduced to several major suppliers to do business with at this time. However, at this time, another drug was becoming more fashionable. In the 80s, it was heroin. In the 90s, it was ecstasy. And in the early 2000s, it was cocaine. Shortly after he arrived in Spain, Kinahan began developing a smuggling operation that would see cocaine transported back to Ireland, with Dublin once more becoming the epicenter of the country's drug crisis. Violence became rampant as gangs feuded over drug supplies, and as Daniel and Christopher Jr. continued to maintain control of their father's business, they ushered in a less subtle way of dealing with things using firearms and fists. Their associates at the time included the likes of brothers Liam and David Byrne, Frederick Fat Freddy Thompson, a convicted murderer, and Paddy Doyle, a career criminal and murderer. One of the most important connections Daniel made in this network of criminals, however, was a man by the name of Gary Hutch. The Hutch Organized Crime Gang is a criminal organization similar to that of the Kinahans. Mainly based in Dublin, its operations have also taken place in the UK and Spain, and its assets are believed to be worth as much as 20 million euros. Their criminal activities include murder, drug trafficking, and armed robbery, amongst other things, with many of their infamous heists dating back to the 1980s and connected to Jerry Hutch, the gang's leader, who was also known as the Monk. Jerry Hutch is suspected of being responsible for plotting the Bank of Ireland's Central Dublin branch heist in 2009, which saw the theft of millions of euros, the vast majority of which remain unrecovered. In 2008, Gary Hutch proved his loyalty to the Kinahans by throwing his best friend, Paddy Doyle, under the bus. Though The Guardian reported at the time that the Russian mafia was to blame, many Irish journalists have concluded that Doyle's murder lay at the feet of his associates, the Kinahan. After becoming the primary suspect in multiple murders in Dublin, Doyle fled to the Costa del Sol, though he was taken in by the Kinahans. With Daniel and Christopher Jr. having recently moved out there themselves, he began to cause problems when he started getting into altercations with numerous foreign gangsters in a way that was reckless and a hindrance to the Kinahans' drug empire. On the afternoon of February 4th, the vehicle he was driving with Hutch and Fat Freddy Thompson was shot at by gunmen in another car. 4 shots hit the front windscreen, and another hit the passenger door before Hutch, who was driving, lost control and smashed into a lamppost. Both Hutch and Thompson escaped unscathed, but Doyle was shot twice while attempting to flee the scene and died. The survivors attended his funeral and spun a story that the Russian mafia was responsible for Doyle's demise, but many suspect that the pair were complicit in the murder and that it was entirely orchestrated by the Kinahans. By this time, the Spanish police had become aware of the Kinahans and didn't like that such murders were happening on their turf, as these kinds of reports often drove away tourists. As a result, Operation Shovel was given the green light and took place between 2008 and 2010. During this time, authorities discovered that Christopher Jr. had been placed on the money laundering side of the operation, while Daniel dealt with the drug supplying and the difficult decisions, or, in other words, the violent, murderous side of the business. Eventually, the information that they gathered led Spanish authorities to apprehend both brothers and their father. Simultaneous raids were carried out as part of the operation by Irish, British, and Dutch authorities, resulting in the arrest of over 30 suspects, not limited to simple gang members, but also lawyers, accountants, and other professionals connected to the Kinahan gang's operations. Kinahan's villa, worth about 6 million euros, was searched as part of the task. By all accounts, the Spanish authorities were confident that they had finally pinned down the Irish mafia and dissolved the group completely. But by 2013, all of the Kinahans had been bailed and were back on the streets of Costa del Sol, resuming business as normal. Around this time, Daniel founded MTK Global with Irish boxer Matthew Macklin in Marbella, Spain. The management company signed numerous professional boxers and martial artists, including Tyson Fury and Darren Till. Daniel would allegedly part ways with the business in 2017, but many in the industry have contested this claim. He continues to remain a fixture in the world of boxing, helping to broker deals and, at one point, acting as a special advisor to KHK Sports, a company owned by a member of the Bahraini royal family. Notably, shortly after the release of the Kinahans and their associates, the mother of Daniel and Christopher Jr., Jean Boylan, died. Jean had raised the two as a single mother in the Oliver Bond flats in Dublin. as Kinahan was in and out of prison for most of their childhood. By all accounts, these blocks of flats were ravaged by drugs during the pair's upbringing, and Jean was no stranger to Dublin's drug culture. A volunteer with several addiction charities, she hoped that her children would have a better future, but as we know, both followed in their father's footsteps as adults. Many reporters attended Jean's funeral to establish the Kinahans' latest associates and to see the two sons for themselves. Following the service in South Dublin, it was discovered that graffiti had been sprayed on the doors of a Russian Orthodox church next to the crematorium where Jean's body had been taken. The spray-painted words read, "Gary Hutch, you rat." The exact circumstances around the disintegration of Hutch's and Daniel's relationship are unclear, but it was unmistakable that something had happened. Journalist Nicola Tallant believed that Hutch believed himself to be an equal in the Kinahan family, and Daniel Kinahan left Gary Hutch behind, spurning Hutch as he did so. The aftermath of the friendship coming to an end was, by all accounts, messy, leading to the Hutch-Kinahan Feud. In 2014, a boxer named Jamie Moore was shot in the legs in Marbella, Spain, at Daniel's villa, after a gunman was found to be waiting in the bushes nearby. Jamie would survive the incident while the perpetrator managed to escape. Much of the speculation was that Jamie had been shot in a case of mistaken identity, that it was Daniel Kinahan who was the real target. The police were eventually able to track the vehicle the culprit left in, and corrupt members of the force revealed to Daniel information about the vehicle, which led to the conclusion that Gary Hutch was the one responsible for the crime. In the subsequent days, however, the Kinahans did not respond in kind. Instead, Hutch reached out to his uncle Jerry and pleaded with him to make an arrangement for the pair to meet. Hutch and Daniel subsequently made a deal where Hutch would pay 200,000 euros to compensate for the shooting. But despite agreeing to the deal, it was noted that Daniel still sought revenge, perhaps unsurprising given his track record of using violence. Specifically, Daniel wanted to get even with Patrick Hutch Jr., whom he believed was the gunman on the night that Jamie Moore was shot. He told the Hutch family that he wanted Patrick to present himself for a punishment to be given, for him to be shot in the legs in the same way that Jamie was. This was reportedly agreed to, with sources stating that Patrick took the punishment in the hopes that his brother would be spared. For months, nothing more was said of the 2014 incident. However, everything changed at 11:30 a.m. on September 24, 2015, when 34-year-old Gary Hutch was chased near his apartment in Marbella by a masked gunman and ultimately shot 3 times on the grounds of the complex. He reportedly pleaded with the killer before the trigger was pulled. 2 weeks later, his brother Derek was stabbed while serving his prison sentence. Reportedly, Kinahan Sr. had put a 10,000 euro bounty on him. He survived the incident. Later that same year, in late December, Jerry Hutch became the new target of the Kinahans. Hutch was holidaying in Lanzarote at the time with his wife when he bumped into an old acquaintance, a woman who asked where they were going. After Hutch's wife replied, the woman reportedly asked her to spend time with her and let Hutch go off on his own. He would later recall thinking how odd this was, and at that moment, he suspected the woman was working for the Kinahans. The couple subsequently moved on to a different bar, and a short time later, 2 gunmen walked in. Hutch stated that he walked towards the 2, but they didn't even see him, and he managed to slip out unnoticed and unscathed. Around this same time, back in Dublin, an associate of the Hutches, Darren Kearns, was also killed after leaving a restaurant. Jerry Hutch was an established figure in Dublin's gangland affairs, and many, including law enforcement and journalists, were shocked at the Kinahan family's bold attempt to take him out. It is believed that their hit on Jerry Hutch is what led to the infamous Regency Hotel shooting the following year. On February 5, 2016, a boxing event was being hosted by the World Boxing Organization at the Regency Hotel in Whitehall, Dublin. During the weigh-in for the match, however, onlookers were shocked when banging sounds suddenly rang out. CCTV footage and phone recordings obtained by media outlets show the subsequent panic and fear flowing through the attendees as they realized what the banging was: gunfire. 4 men had crashed the event, at least 2 of whom were carrying AK-47 rifles and dressed like the Garda Emergency Response Unit. The others were dressed in face-obscuring masks, army-style helmets, and flak jackets, though later, further CCTV footage would reveal to investigators that at least 6 people were involved in total, with one person appearing to be a man disguised as a woman, wearing a wig and long skirt. During the assault, David Byrne, a member of the Kinahan Organization, was shot dead. 2 other men were injured and taken to the hospital. Law enforcement believed that the shooters had planned to kill others, though it's unclear why they did not. Authorities also suspected that Daniel Kinahan was the real target, but he had bowed out of the event early. The gunman escaped in a Ford Transit van. Though it was later located, it was found to have been burnt out. In May of 2016, Gary Hutch's brother, Patrick, was charged with the murder of David Byrne during the attack at the Regency Hotel, but the case collapsed following the suicide of the lead investigator. In 2021, Jerry Hutch was arrested in Spain in connection with the attack and charged, but he was ultimately acquitted. 2 men, Paul Murphy and Jason Bonney, were later found guilty of facilitating the murder. Between 2015 and 2018, about 18 people died in the Hutch-Kinahan Feud, including Jerry Hutch's brother Eddie and 3 of his nephews. 16 of these murders were at the hands of the Kinahans, and at least 2 of the murders were of unconnected people killed in a case of mistaken identity. In 2019, 24-year-old Lee Boylan, an associate of the Kinahan family, was shot and critically injured, though he did survive his wounds. It is unclear if this most recent incident was carried out by the Hutch family or if it was an unrelated case of attempted murder. For some of these cases, arrests have been made. Hutch family associate Gary Hanley was targeted for murder in November of 2017, but the attempt was thwarted by Garda surveillance, and 3 men were convicted in relation to the crime. Similarly, a 29-year-old friend of Gary Hutch, James Gately, was shot 5 times in May 2017. He survived the assault thanks to his bulletproof vest, and in 2021, a man was sentenced to 11 years in prison for directing the hit and involving an Estonian hitman named Imre Arakas to carry out the task. Arakas is currently in prison in Lithuania. In 2018, a man named James Quinn was charged and convicted of involvement in the murder of Gary Hutch and of possession of an illegal weapon. Quinn is a former boxer with a lengthy criminal record who has been described as Daniel Kinahan's in-house hitman. But the jury during the Gary Hutch trial found that it had not been proven that he had been paid to murder Hutch. Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. Thomas Bomber Kavanagh was a significant drug dealer in Ireland during the 1990s, so much so that he was the first man to have his assets apprehended by the Criminal Assets Bureau, set up following the murder of journalist Veronica Guerin in 1996. Newspaper reports from the time discussed how the 3-bedroomed house in Drimnagh, Dublin, had been seized and put on the market by the CAB. Although properties in the area were known to have sold for over €220,000 due to Kavanagh's reputation, it was believed that it would sell for little over €180,000 instead. Journalist Nicola Tallant told the BBC that following this, Kavanagh left Ireland and moved to the town of Tamworth, England, to start over and secured work as a car dealer. But despite having moved to the country penniless, he soon began to show signs of wealth. It would later emerge that the car dealership was simply a front to smuggle drugs and weapons. Investigators with the National Crime Agency, or NCA, quickly learned after delving into the Kinahan crime family that Kavanagh was a senior within its ranks, essentially tasked with heading up the UK leg of the organization. He later ran it from the fortified mansion he lived in, complete with reinforced doors and bulletproof glass. In January 2017, Irish police discovered that 2 associates of Kavanagh's, Daniel Canning and Gary Vickery, were linked to several freight and logistics firms which had been connected with shipments of drugs and weapons which were seized. In October of that year, they were both arrested, along with a man named Martin Byrne, after further shipments were captured, including around 15 kilos of cocaine and over 220 kilos of marijuana. The substances had been stored inside a 6-ton industrial tarmac removal machine at Dover, England. A tracking device placed on the machine led investigators to two industrial units, which were both raided and one of which contained another machine with traces of cocaine inside it. Furthermore, a handgun and ammunition were discovered, with the DNA on it matching Byrne. Boxes of tracking devices were also recovered. They were found to be identical to those placed on the machine in Dover. A raid of Vickery's property revealed over 100 kilos worth of boric acid powder, a substance often used as a cocaine cutting agent, as well as 43,000 pounds and 200,000 euros, both in cash. A search of Canning's property led investigators to recover encrypted communications devices, multiple phones, and small amounts of cash. Experts decoded the devices, and one of the most significant pieces of evidence discovered was a photograph of a newborn wearing a baby grow with Baby Kavanagh written on it, later established as being Kavanagh's granddaughter. In the messages exchanged, he was regularly referred to as the Gaffer rather than by name. The men were also found to have communicated with European contacts to organize shipments overseas. In 2019, Kavanagh was arrested upon his return to the UK. The NCA subsequently raided his Tamworth property, seizing cash and various currencies totaling 35,000 pounds, numerous phones and dozens of weapons, including an illegal stun gun for possession of which he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. NCA officers were able to tie Kavanagh, as well as his associates, to large-scale drug shipments worth around 30 million pounds, as well as money laundering and firearm smuggling. All three would later admit to conspiring to import Class A and B drugs and money laundering, while Daniel Canning also confessed to possessing a firearm and ammunition. In March of 2022, Kavanagh was given 21 years in prison. Canning was given 19.5, and Vickery was given 20. Martin Byrne likely would have been charged in some capacity, but he died in 2018. In 2024, 6 years were added to Kavanagh's sentence after the NCA unveiled a plot that involved the 57-year-old, leading them to a buried stash of weapons in order to lighten his sentence. The plot involved him enlisting the help of Kinahan Group member Liam Byrne, who was also his brother-in-law, and Sean Kent. The two men were dispatched to fill several holdalls with guns and ammunition, but the scheme was uncovered when French authorities decrypted incriminating messages, which proved that Kavanagh had been pulling the strings of the entire thing from prison. Liam Byrne was given 5 years behind bars, and Sean Kent was given 6. The apprehension of Kavanagh is considered a huge blow to the Kinahan organization. Recent reports by Irish and British journalists note that the organization is beginning to fall from its place as the #1 drug supplier in Ireland, having been replaced by a crime group known as the Family. The Family have so far avoided any public disputes with other organizations, focusing solely on their drug operations, and authorities now consider them the leading traffickers of cocaine and heroin into Ireland. Present day. In April of 2022, the U.S. Department of State announced that, under the Narcotics Rewards Program, it was offering up to $5 million for information leading to the arrest and/or conviction of several Kinahan family members, including Daniel, Christopher Jr., and Kinahan Sr. By this time, the Kinahans' operations were far-reaching, with multi-million-euro drug shipments still occurring in Spain. The then U.S. Ambassador to Ireland, Claire Cronin, stated, "The Kinahan transnational criminal organization has been accused of a wide range of heinous crimes all around the world, including murder, trafficking in firearms, and narcotics. But it isn't just the previously discussed crimes that put the organization into the U.S.'s line of fire. They are also believed to have been doing business with Hezbollah, the Islamic militant group that the U.S. have deemed a terrorist organization since 1995. In more recent years, authorities have stated that Hezbollah is a major player in the international drug trade, moving substances and providing money laundering services so that they can raise funds. As well as collaborating with Hezbollah, the Kinahans have also been accused of using the U.S. financial system to commit their crimes. Around this same time, authorities in the UAE froze the Kinahans' assets. As of 2019, Daniel and Christopher Jr. have been residing in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. Their father is also believed to be in the country. They have set up numerous companies here, supposedly trading in food, clothing, and textiles, as well as several consultancies. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists noted that although business owners are supposed to be thoroughly vetted in the city, and the Kinahans have had heavy media coverage and are well known as a drug cartel, the Kinahans were deemed by UAE authorities to be low risk. Investigations into the businesses revealed that, unsurprisingly, they were being used to ship drugs and launder dirty money. By all accounts, members of the organization living in Dubai have been doing so freely without the attention of the local authorities. As well as having ties to the country's regime, they also have financial links to some of the most powerful families in the city. In October of 2024, Ireland signed an extradition treaty with the UAE, and that same month, prominent Kinahan family figure Sean McGovern was arrested. He is believed to be Daniel's right-hand man and is wanted in connection with the murder of Noel Duckegg Kerwin, an associate of the Hutch family who was killed in 2016. While, as of March 2025, he was still awaiting extradition, Irish authorities noted that they are happy with the level of cooperation they are receiving from their UAE counterparts. As of March 2025, Irish authorities are considering laying multiple serious charges against the Kinahan family, though these charges have yet to emerge.